Welcome to another episode of the greatest books of all time. My name is Katie, and this week we will discuss It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. In a little bit, I'll discuss an important theme, symbols, figurative language, and characterization. But for now, let's discuss why this book deserves to have airtime on this podcast. Originally, I found this book by Google searching great books for high schoolers. This book came up as one of the best fiction books for high school and college kids. I read the blurb and connected with the book instantly. This book was personally a great choice, but I think that all high schoolers can relate or at least sympathize to elements of the story. Here's a quick summary. This kid named Craig gets into a really tough school called Executive Pre-Professional High School. Then he gets diagnosed with depression and he can't do his work, and he doesn't have fun with his friends anymore. His parents send him to lots of therapists, but Craig doesn't think therapy works. Then his depression gets so bad that he decides to kill himself. But he doesn't. Then he checks himself into a psychiatric hospital and stays there for a short while. During his time at the hospital, he gets better and learns a lot about himself and the world around him. One of the reasons I chose this book was because it's quite an eye-opener for high schoolers of the 21st century. The book helped me understand that school is not everything and that your mental health should always come first. Craig learns important lessons through different literary elements that Vizzini emphasizes throughout Craig's mental health journey. One theme that I find very important in the novel is pressure, especially on high schoolers. Craig's struggle to get into Executive Pre-Professional High School causes him lots of stress, which I believe was a trigger for his depression. After only being at the new high school for 3 months, Craig says, "I had stress vomiting for the first time." This was heartbreaking to read because the amount of high schoolers who stress this much is disturbingly high. Craig's stress from school adds to his problems with the cycling. When Craig is really depressed, he thinks, over and over again, a cycling of tasks, of failures, of problems. I'm young and I'm already screwing up my life. Which brings me to figurative language like the cycling. Craig thinks about a lot when he has bad depression episodes. Craig says that the cycling is when his mind is going over the same thoughts over and over, when my thoughts race against each other in a circle. The cycling is an example of figurative language because he uses the term to describe the racing thoughts in his mind. I think this is a great use of the word cycling. Without even explaining it, I knew what Vizzini meant. Another use of figurative language is the outside world. Craig uses this term to describe the world outside of the psychiatric hospital. The outside world is stressful to Craig, which is why he finds so much comfort in the hospital. After Craig first enters, he thinks, "People in the outside world don't know what's happened to me. I'm in a sort of stasis right now." I think Craig means that he doesn't want people to find out on the outside because explaining his stay in a psychiatric hospital would be stressful to him. Craig also uses very thoughtful symbols to describe aspects of his life, and Vizzini uses some to represent Craig's life. One of the symbols that Craig uses is his tentacles. Craig calls the unwanted parts of his life tentacles. He uses this term because humans don't have tentacles, but Craig feels weighed down by people and tasks he doesn't want in his life, much like a human doesn't want tentacles on their body. The tentacles add to the theme of pressure because Craig thinks, "They were all too strong and they had me wrapped too tight, and to cut them, I'd have to do something crazy." His tentacles cause him to feel stressed and paralyzed, which can contribute to symptoms of depression. All of these elements of figurative language make Craig the character that he is. I think it's important to understand who Craig really is as a character. His personality is hard to define because a lot of his traits are consumed by depression. Craig and his depression are two completely different things, but characterizing which one can be difficult. Craig says, "It's so hard to talk when you want to kill yourself." This is obviously depression. When Craig says, "I always look like I'm about to cry," I think that's physical description as in having puffy eyes. But when Craig says, "I have a system with bathrooms, I spend a lot of time in them," I think this quote is tricky. Craig spends a lot of time in bathrooms because he stress vomits and likes the alone time. Is this a personality trait, liking bathrooms, or is this another trait of depression? I believe there's evidence for both. Considering his introverted nature and his need for bathrooms as a place for darkness, quiet, and calm during depressive episodes, there is definitely evidence for both. To wrap things up, I'll leave you all with some questions to consider. Number 1. Do you believe Craig is a relatable character? Number 2. Do you think Vizzini could be portraying himself through Craig? And number 3. How do you think Craig would define himself without depression? This concludes today's episode of The Greatest Books of All Time. Join us next week when we discuss The Ecology of a Cracker Childhood. Thank you all for listening. This podcast was sponsored by the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which provides confidential support for people in distress, prevention, and crisis resources for you and your loved ones, and best practices for professionals. If you know someone in crisis, please call 1-800-273-8255. Thank you.